The other day, while researching for this video, I came across an Ethel Cain subreddit discussing her influences and the comparisons people sometimes make to other artists like Lana Del Rey. One comment stood out to me the most. It said, "Ethel Cain is kinda like a Gen Z queer Lana, except Lana is the romanticized American dream that only 5% of people ever get to experience, while Ethel is the dark tragic reality the other 95% only ever do." While I really don't like comparing artists because Lana and Ethel are obviously completely different, I do still think this comment was pretty good at describing her work for Lana fans or for those who may not know her.
I got a lot of comparisons to Lana Del Rey early on, which I always thought was funny because I feel like Lana Del Rey is very about the glamour and the glitz and the opulence of America.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm very much the opposite of that. It's like broke and trailer parks, but like for real.
Ethel Cain represents the gritty reality of the American dream and the queer experience in a small town religious setting. This is especially evident in Preacher's Daughter, where she combines romantic hopes and dreams with the dark, festering rot of reality and trauma. Ever since Ethel Cain released Preacher's Daughter in 2022, her career has skyrocketed to prominence. The album received widespread positive reviews from critics and even broke records, with Ethel Cain becoming the first openly trans artist with a top 10 debut album. Preacher's Daughter is groundbreaking in many different ways, creating an immersive world that tells an engaging story about the American dream, religion, queerness, abuse, and trauma. It should be no surprise then to see just how much Preacher's Daughter has been reviewed, reacted to, and dissected. But one thing I haven't seen anyone do is a documentary-style video on the woman behind Ethel Cain, Hayden Anendonias. In this video, we're gonna do just that, exploring Hayden's childhood and upbringing, how growing up in rural Florida, being homeschooled and raised in the church affected her future career in the lore of Ethel Cain, her early underground Atlas White Silas eras, Inbred, and the development of her distinct Southern Gothic ethereal aesthetic and sound, Preacher's Daughter, and the transmutation of trauma into art, and then finish by talking about queer cultural reclamation and how Ethel Cain shows us how to appreciate our small town, religious, even traumatic past, but in a realistic, refreshing, empowering way. In a world where people continually watch their standard of living decline, realize the American dream is an American fantasy, and suffer from mental illnesses, we increasingly want our art to reflect it, and within Ethel Cain's work, we find exactly that. So without further ado, this is the true story behind Ethel Cain. Ethel Cain, whose real name is Hayden Silas Anehdonia, was born on March 24, 1998 in Tallahassee, Florida, before moving about an hour away to the small town of Perry and being raised there. For some quick ADHD-inspired context, Perry and Tallahassee are both located in the slim panhandle portion of Florida and are considered far closer culturally to Alabama and Georgia than the southern Caribbean part of the state, being that the panhandle lacked much of the direct Spanish colonial history that dominated the larger peninsula. Hayden would later go on to describe the appreciation she has for this conservative southern culture as comforting but paradoxical, being that she is a trans woman and that the politics within these cultures aren't forgiving to say the least. This trend of queer people reclaiming rural, religious, or small town aesthetics is something I've noticed growing lately, which I believe is linked to a widespread rise in romanticism and a broader societal desire for authenticity and cultural reclamation, which I'll discuss more later on. This Deep South cultural influence would go on to profoundly shape Hayden's future aesthetic, artistry, and eventually Ethel Cain's backstory. Hayden's parents were both prominent in the Christian church, with her father being a Southern Baptist deacon and her mother singing in the church choir, where Hayden would first be introduced to singing and music as well. When she was around 8, she would also begin studying classical piano with strong influences from Christian music. Hayden's early life was dominated by the church, saying in a 2022 Them Mag interview, "Everything in my life revolved around church. Everyone I knew went to our church. I wasn't allowed to hang out with people who didn't. My life was entirely for Jesus." Hayden was also homeschooled, with her mother taking her out of the local daycare at just 4 years old. Hayden has also said that growing up in the South felt like a place frozen in time, with much of the technology being outdated and spending much of her childhood between her parents' and grandparents' houses. This can help explain her future appreciation for VHS and 90s-esque aesthetics and culture.
When you grow up in small towns, especially in the South, I feel like everything is very behind the times. So like, you know, I was a kid in the 2000s, but everything there was very like 90s. I grew up with VHS. We didn't get a DVD player till I was like probably 6 or 7. It's just kind of like permanent nostalgia, you know. Half of the time I grew up at my grandma's house, and it's just like back and forth between your parents' house and your grandma's house. You know, we all lived in trailers. It was just a very simple, family-oriented life.
Hayden's household was culturally limited, with no secular music or most Hollywood movies allowed. Although her upbringing was religious, she also wasn't shielded from the dark realities of American history, saying, "It was this weird upbringing where you hear about all these horrible things that have happened as being a part of the past. Then the present is this safe bubble where there's nothing bad and nobody swears and no one gets hurt. Like a perfect little paradise of Jesus. It was completely normal until it wasn't." Around the age of 12, Hayden began to notice that she liked boys and came out to her family. This is where that perfect, sheltered Jesus paradise was shattered, with her hyper-religious family, even her hometown, turning on her. "I had the usual anxieties of a child, but when I told my family I liked boys, all hell broke loose. Everyone thought I was a freak. I was stalked by adults who didn't even go to our church through their children's social media accounts. It was like a witch hunt." When Hayden was around 16, she left the church, unable to reconcile its politics and what it preached about her identity. She was able to leave Perry when she was 18 and got herself a job at a nail salon about an hour away. This is where she had the revelation many queer people who escaped their oppressive hometowns eventually have. "I'm free. I survived. I'm in control now. This is the beginning of the rest of my life." Shortly after moving from Perry, Hayden also began experimenting with drugs, saying, "Within a year of moving out, I had tried every drug on the planet. I was having all kinds of meaningless sex with absolute strangers. It was out of control." Unfortunately, this is a very common experience for those in the queer and trans communities, being that growing up without any real community, acceptance, or understanding of who you are can lead to risky behaviors as a way to cope and desperately seek the comfort you were never afforded as a child. Drug and alcohol use, hypersexualization or hookup culture, and running away or living on the road as a way to escape yourself and past traumas. These real-world experiences would help set the stage for the future world-building and lore of Preacher's Daughter and Ethel Cain, with Hayden saying the album was almost like a way to live out an alternate timeline, a mirror universe of what could have happened if she had stayed on the dangerous path she was on, almost like a cautionary tale expressed sonically.
I always describe it as a cautionary tale because I think it's just kind of everything that I've always been scared of, everything I've been worried about happening, I kind of just dump it into that story. And
when Hayden was around 20, she came out as transgender and soon after began transitioning. This is where she would legally change her name, something commonly done with those who are transgender as a way to live a life more authentic to them. The name she settled on was Hayden Silas Anehdonia, with anhedonia meaning an inability to experience pleasure, with it being listed as one of the most common symptoms of depression and other mental health disorders on WebMD. Many fans often point out how Anhedonia is quite a fitting name, with her music often being described as longingful, sorrowful, or depression personified sonically. The meaning was very poignant at the time, and I thought it was pretty regardless of meaning. I was like, oh, nothing has any consequences. I do what I want. Now I try to live my life as a defiance of that word. As an artist myself, having people appreciate and recognize your art will definitely help with mental illness, and sometimes it's honestly the whole point. So I'm sure that ever since the success of Preacher's Daughter, Hayden's mental health has probably gotten better, meaning the Anhedonia title might not be as fitting or accurate as it previously was. Like I always say, art's purpose is to express, and it can transform trauma into pleasure and can help one heal by flipping the script and reclaiming the power it previously had over the person who suffered from it. But this use of words or culture in a non-literal but symbolic or reclaiming way is something common with Hayden. Much of her religious, traumatic symbolism and themes in her future work aren't because she is literally a Bible-thumping conservative or because she finds pleasure in extreme trauma, but are more about reclamation through expression, using art as an outlet to process her religious upbringing, which we'll talk more about later on. Hayden is also neurodivergent and autistic, saying it helps explain a lot of how she expresses herself and her artistry. I genuinely feel bad for non-autistic people who will never know what music can truly feel like. I'm autistic, and so that definitely heightens sensory to everything. I think that's why I have so much crossover between media, because it's like there's never just one sense. Music is not just something you listen to. Film is not just something you watch. You get all these senses from all these things. When I'm producing music, I literally feel sometimes I can see it. I have to close my eyes and I imagine the bass is the earth. I imagine the synths are rising up next to you, and I imagine the vocals are high in the sky, right in the center. I close my eyes and picture the sound around me. That's how I mix. What's fascinating to me about this is that I have never actually heard someone explain how I also experience sound so accurately, and it leads me to wonder if she also has
synesthesia,
or a neurological condition where stimulation of one sensory pathway causes other sensory pathways to automatically be activated as well. So think of people seeing colors or shapes when listening to music, or letters and numbers having specific assigned colors. This point also sort of reminds me of what I briefly talked about in my last video, and how I think it can be argued that some of the best art comes from those who are neurodivergent, due to good art almost always being born from a subversion of norms or an innovation of expression. This ability to subvert and alter people's perception through the use of art comes naturally to those who are neurodivergent, because we already see and experience the world in such unconventional ways, allowing us to reflect that in our art and effortlessly craft something refreshing and unique. This is why I was not surprised at all to find out that Hayden is autistic, because so much of her work is so subversive and innovative. Preacher's Daughter and much of her early underground work creates a paradoxical experience. Pleasure from genuinely good music, but shock and horror from the subject matter it's based on. This is not something that many people can or do understand, which makes it all the more valuable. Good art inherently creates conversation, contemplation, and forces you to really stop dead in your tracks and appreciate what it has to offer.
I was trying to get into film school and it was very difficult, so I started making music in the meantime to kind of keep myself busy, and I just wound up loving it. And I started teaching myself how to produce on GarageBand, and then moved up to Logic, and then eventually Ableton.
In 2017, Hayden enrolled in Florida State University, which is where her music career officially began, experimenting with many different reverb-heavy, choral-inspired sounds on GarageBand.
I'm gonna be a musician. I was like, I'm going to be a musician. I had probably 100 followers on Instagram. I had no friends, no connections, no nothing. It was literally just me in my bedroom. I recorded my entire first mixtape using my Apple EarPod microphone. Like, it was so booty.
Hayden's discography goes as far back as 2013. The first known album recorded by Hayden is known simply as the 2013 album, being that it was never released. Hayden has described the 20-song album as inspired by her idol Florence Welch, creating it using a Casio keyboard. I grew up in choir and just always enjoyed singing around the house, and I even wrote a shitty little album at 15 as an ode to my idol at the time, Florence Welch, because I wanted to be her so badly when I grew up. My mom was very strict on us only being allowed to listen to Christian music, but my dad would play old country rock in the truck when we were alone, so it created this weird stylistic intersection in my head that nobody was really feeling. By the time I was 19, I was really itching for that very specific kind of music that no one was making, so I just decided to bite the bullet and try making it myself.
So White Silas was kind of a weird transitional experimental phase where I was like going out of making electronic music into kind of making that grungier, more lo-fi, alternative kind of sound.
The first known moniker Hayden went by was Atlas, before being replaced by White Silas, and around 2017 to 2019, she began releasing several dreamlike Georgian chant-inspired singles and mixtapes on platforms like Tumblr and SoundCloud. She has described this time in her early career as heavily experimental, allowing her to really explore and find her sound. White Silas was kind of my scatterbrained test run phase. I was testing out a million different genres and visual styles and aesthetics all at once to see what felt best and what felt the most me. Eventually, I realized my heart was pulled the strongest to my roots, which is the intersection between my experiences in the heavily religious American South and my dreams of the wild and free American West. Hayden would release many songs and EPs during the Atlas White Silas eras like Arcane Vessels and Sad Music for Sad People in 2018. Around 2019, Hayden settled on the moniker Ethel Cain and released her debut EP under the new name Carpetbed in September of that year. Around this time, Hayden connected with Nicole Dollanganger, a Canadian-American singer, opening her tour and performing songs from the Carpetbed EP, as well as new songs that would feature on her second Ethel Cain EP, Golden Age. Golden Age was inspired by experiences with her first real love from that year. The EP was longingful and melancholic, focusing on the pain of love, coming of age, and the desire to transcend one's suffering. The production featured distorted, reverb-heavy, dreamlike vocals, simple instrumentation, and a heavy emphasis on slow beats and silence.
Swaying in the lamplight.
EP has a haunting, hazy feel to it, with Hayden developing her unique style and transitioning into the Southern Gothic, siren-like, ethereal aesthetic and sound that would later become defining features of Ethel Cain and Preacher's Daughter. Golden Age was very much inspired by the late 90s Christian synthpop I grew up listening to. Michelle Toombs, Nicole Nordman, Jackie Velasquez, lots of intensely dreamy, cerebral, Enya-esque instrumentals with soft cooing female vocals. I just mixed it with the grungier modern dream pop alt-rock that I was listening to at the time and wound up with this faux cinematic shoegazy project. Golden Age wound up just being the product of my hopes and fears and pleasures and pains, all regarding that love. Some of it from experience, some projecting, some wishing. Sonically, I just wanted to capture the drugged out haze I spent the entire hot Florida summer drifting through. I wanted the entire EP to just feel like a washed out, sweaty, and romantic fever dream. These two EPs, Carpetbed and Golden Age, can be seen as the moment the Southern Gothic, hauntingly beautiful Ethel Cain we've all come to know was born, laying the aesthetic and sonic framework that would later blossom into the multi-layered, mythologized work found in Preacher's Daughter.
The basic foundation of Ethel Cain, which is the ethereal vocals, the old Kodak photos of me as a kid. Let me build up this imagery as an all-American Southern girl growing up, nowhere near the lap of luxury, kind of that failed American dream aesthetic. That was very clear to me. That's what Ethel Cain was about from the very beginning.
With the conclusion of Golden Age, Hayden said she felt pigeonholed into the sad girl archetype due to the somber, longing nature of the work. Remember, these two EPs came out around the late 2010s at the height of the Tumblr sad girl, SoundCloud sad boy eras, which I'm sure influenced her. Hayden has said she was tired of focusing so much on sadness and wanted to lean more into anger for her next EP, and in April of 2021, she released Inbred. With Inbred, my production skills got a bit better, so I wanted to clean up my sound, turn down the reverb a smidge, and try my hand at really playing my own guitar bass. Golden Age really had some people shoehorning me into the sad girl shtick, and I was like, I don't want to be a sad girl, I want to be a mad girl. So for Inbred, I wanted to channel more aggression and dominance into the soundscape. I was listening to old Avril Lavigne, Chelsea Wolfe, King Woman, Female Rage, all the way. Inbred featured 6 tracks, with the single Crush being one of her first truly successful songs, helping her gain more exposure and growing her fan base. Inbred built off the cinematic, dark Southern Gothic themes from her past 2 EPs, revolving around toxic relationships viewed through the lens of Christianity, a desire for transcendence, rejection, and even generational trauma and abuse. The production was much more refined compared to her past work, with the heavy reverb, distortion, echoing vocals, and sound collages, making it sound almost like how VHS looks, distorted, grainy, and nostalgic. The ethereal, lo-fi, dreamlike sound of the EP helped set the standard of what would come to be known as Ethel Cain's distinct sound, like a fuzzy, longingful memory, but presented sonically, transporting us to life in a small town where you feel trapped, abandoned, and shut out all at once. The name Inbred also continues Hayden's use of marrying trauma with art, using dark taboo themes but translated through ethereal, beautiful musical production. In the same vein as the overarching theme for the debut record I've been tirelessly working on, I'm deeply engrossed in the idea of generational trauma in skeletons and closets. Those deeply rooted issues in your family that never get resolved and are just further inbred into your bloodline with each generation, twisting and turning and contorting until it rips you all apart. The EP received positive reception from critics, with Pitchfork rating it a 7.8, and by the middle of 2021, she began work on her debut album, Preacher's Daughter. Preacher's Daughter was released on May 12, 2022 under Hayden's independent label, Daughters of Cain, and is considered her breakout work, with it being universally acclaimed and receiving high scores from most critics. Preacher's Daughter fully submerges itself into the aesthetic and narratives present in her past 3 EPs, using Southern Gothic, religious, forbidden, and traumatic themes to tell a multi-layered story that feels like music, storytelling, and film made all into one. What Hayden does on Preacher's Daughter is genuinely so fascinating on so many fronts, and in fact, it's so interesting that I'm actually going to have to dedicate my next entire deep dive into just that album alone. There are literally so many angles I can come at Preacher's Daughter, from how it combines dark, gritty realism with nostalgic romanticism, religious trauma, and how growing up in the church affects your worldview, to queerness and how religion also affects that, to just trauma and abuse, femininity and female rage, to how the album genuinely feels so saturated with lore that it's more like a novel or movie than an album. It just goes literally so deep. So definitely subscribe and turn on your notifications for that one, because that's going to be a very big video. The one thing I will say is that I think what Hayden does through her artistry is honestly just so unique and refreshing. She is able to combine so many experiences into one immersive story, helping it resonate with many groups of people, regardless of how different they may be from one another. Women may listen to Preacher's Daughter and feel she really encapsulates the female experience in female rage. Queer and trans groups may feel she authentically reflects the experience of being outcast and tainted by society for their identity. Those from religious backgrounds may resonate with the oppressive, contradictory nature of religion. Those from small towns understand the feeling of rural rot and a longing for escape, and those who experience abuse may feel seen and heard. It's this unique ability to tie such different experiences into one cohesive piece of work that I think makes her so loved by so many. The way Hayden's entire discography turns queer experience on its head, focusing on religion, rural towns, abuse, trauma, all these things that many queer people understand but that most artists don't touch on, makes her all the more interesting. While the experiences she details may be common for queer people from rural towns, we don't really have any big artists touching on that specific aspect, and therefore it can feel like that experience is underrepresented, with most of us expected to just move to a big city and discard every aspect of our small town religious past and culture. Like I've mentioned so many times in past videos, the queer experience and the culture that tends to develop around it is almost always metropolitan. As someone who's gay, small towns, rural America, country aesthetics are just off limits to us. If you want to meet other gay or queer people and not live in fear of discrimination, you better move to the closest city and stay as far away from any religious institution as possible. Like Hayden experienced herself with drug use and hookup culture, due to the trauma of being queer, many of us often only find community or comfort in the party club scene or in the backseat of some stranger's car from a Grindr hookup. This can feel suffocating and isolating because it feels like we get locked out from all the other normal aspects of life that straight people take for granted. Queer people are like everyone else. Some of us like rural life, appreciate religious aesthetics, or feel like the materialistic, partying city life isn't for us. We shouldn't feel like our past have to be disposed of and can never be appreciated due to heteronormative discrimination. We've never really had someone create a space for us to appreciate anything else, and I kind of see what Ethel Cain and even Chapel Roan do is show us that these are our spaces too, and that we can appreciate them, even if they're traumatic. Now, obviously, Hayden makes it very clear that she appreciates these things in a self-aware, exposing the dark side reclamation way, and not in the literal one many straight people do, but still, it's one thing I really appreciate about her, and I even think can be expanded upon to reflect bigger trends in music, pop culture, and even economics in general. The shallow, hyper-materialistic, forced positivity, you should want to be famous and rich like us narrative and popular culture is really starting to go stale. Most people are struggling, living standards are declining, and we want art that is more reflective of that. Mental illness, abuse, trauma, drug use have never been as high as it is now, and we want the art we consume to relate. We're sick of hearing about foreign brands, perfect bodies, and Miami high-rises. We want to hear about the trauma, grit, and romanticism of small-town, working-class, hopeless life, and I think Hayden is giving us that. She's allowing us to appreciate these previously off-limit aesthetics and experiences, but in a realistic, unapologetic, refreshing way. But again, I'm gonna go way deeper into all of that in my next video, so definitely subscribe if you're interested. I'm actually even thinking about starting like a celebrity series because I really want to make videos on other artists like Grimes and Enya. So let me know if you want me to do more videos like this one, and comment down below what you like most about Ethel Cain and Preacher's Daughter.